This covers pigs, beef, sheep, and poultry, but pigs are my true passion. So I'll give you a bit of an overview of my thoughts on farrowing and the basic principles to ensure success. So management of the sow farrowing and care of the newborn piglet. If you're a breeding herd, farrowing is a really key time to get right, and it dictates how productive you're going to be. And like with most things with livestock, it's all down to attention to detail to achieve or optimize the potential within your sow and your piglets. I know this sounds bizarre because we was talking about farrowing, but preparation, for farrowing does start at breeding. At the end of the day, gestation is 114 days. So when you start breeding those animals, you've got to think in 114 days, have you got the accommodation ready to accommodate those animals at farrowing? Also, it's thinking about things like, when's the right time to serve that gilt? Is she old enough? Is she mature enough? Is she big enough? Because if you do it at the wrong time and she's too big and too fat and she remains too big and too fat, you will end up with problems at point of farrowing. So think ahead. The 114 days doesn't change. So you've got your sow pregnant, you've got her through gestation, and then you're thinking about farrowing. So before farrowing, think about vaccinations. Are they up to date in that breeding sow or breeding gilt? Do you need to give her boosters before farrowing? Now this you'll have already decided with your vet or have a veterinary health plan that you'll know what you're going to vaccinate for or what you decided to vaccinate for or what the risks are within your unit. But what you've got to think is that sow is going to pass on her immunity to the piglets. So for example, if you've got an E. coli problem potentially in piglets, that they get E. coli scour as well as suckling the sow, get the sow vaccinated to protect the piglets. Get that correct, then those piglets are then protected. And that's normally a couple of weeks prior to farrowing. So make sure the vaccinations are up to date. And that might be, if you're an outdoor unit, it might be things to cover Clostridia. They'll pick that up from the soil, but it will protect those piglets. I've got down treat for parasites. That could be ectoparasites, endoparasites. Hopefully people don't suffer too much with ectoparasites because this is the sort of the lice and the mange. And if you've got lice and mange free herd, you shouldn't have any problems with parasites because they're only passed pig to pig. If, however, you do have a problem, make sure you sort that out before farrowing, because again, the sow, after she's given birth, is at quite a low ebb immune-wise, and you really don't want to add pressure to her by having parasites on her as well. In terms of internal parasites, so the worms, our unit, we don't worm at all anymore. We only worm if there's a problem and we identify that problem. But if you're in a higher risk situation where your pigs have opportunities to go outside, then you may consider treating for worms once, twice a year, or probably better prior to farrowing, so that she's nice and clean in the farrowing accommodation and she's not then shedding worm eggs that the piglets will pick up and they end up with worms as soon as they're weaned. So a great time to treat for worms. Now I put wash and disinfect the sow in a question mark. I've never washed and disinfected sows in my career, but some people do and some people swear by it. And I can see the point if you've got animals that are particularly dirty, say they've been outside and you're bringing them into a building to farrow them, then it perhaps is sensible to wash the muck off them, because all you're going to do is bring that muck into that nice clean farrowing accommodation. In terms of disinfection, don't go too strong with the disinfectant. You don't want to burn the sow or anything like that, but it is, again, people will wash them with a mild disinfectant. One of the key ones is allowing time to settle for those animals when they get into the new farrowing accommodation, particularly gilts. It's something very, very new to a gilt, so you want her to be comfortable. It's going to be difficult for her enough when she actually starts parturition, because that's going to be a massive shock to the system. She's not experienced that before, so she needs to get used to those new surroundings, ideally 3 to 5 days minimum a week if you can do it. Sows at the point of farrowing will want to make a nest. It's a natural instinct. So nesting materials, straw, shredded paper, anything that she can carry around, that she can maneuver to try and think she's making a nest. Now, in our situation, we farrow everything through a farrowing crate. That's a bit more difficult, but we still put shredded paper in the pen. We still put hessian sacking in the pen. And while she can't make a proper nest, she can still manipulate that material. And it's proven scientifically, if they can go through that nest making procedure, they will have a better farrowing and less risk of problems, and a lot quicker farrowing as well. And then the bottom one, sow condition. Now this is pretty key, because if you've got extreme conditions, sow condition, it's not good. If you've got a sow that's too fat, again, all the data would suggest that she will be a higher risk of having problems. She's likely to have bigger pigs and likely to be have more problems pushing those pigs out. Also, post farrowing, there's lots of data out there showing that a fat sow actually has a lower appetite. I know it doesn't sound quite right, but it is the case that a fat sow won't actually eat as well post farrowing, and that's when you need that sow to really have a good appetite to be able to produce milk for those pigs. Also, a fat sow is at a higher risk of mastitis, because of the fact that she's got such a big udder and such a big nutrient base inside her that she'll produce way too much milk in that first few days than the piglets will be able to take. So there's a higher risk of mastitis there as well. Conversely, if you get a very thin sow at farrowing, you know that sow is going to lose condition during farrowing, during lactation, sorry. So it will only make her worse, and you end up with this syndrome called thin sow syndrome, where you can never seem to get that weight back on them because they're just way too thin. So optimizing that. What am I talking about when I'm talking about sow condition? The best way is to look at the visual chart on the left there, and we are looking for a sow condition score 3.5, I would say, at farrowing. This is sort of average condition score. You are going to get some that are a bit fatter and some a bit thinner. You know, this is a standard condition score scale used across the world. 1, I've never seen a sow at 1, and I hope I don't see sows at 1 on units, and hopefully you don't either. But you can see they're progressively getting fatter, and you can see 5 is very fat, even for a show pig or anything like that. So you want a sow in good condition but not fat, and there's some key things there on the body shape. Now, body shape is different between breeds. We also back fat scan our sows when they go into the farrowing room as well, and certain breed types are different in terms of that visual on the left, and they will scan different. So we'll have sows that look like a 3 but scan 20 odd mil back fat, and some that look like a 4 and only scan 15. So it's not sort of too important exactly the numbers, but you want them in that sort of probably 3 to 4 range there, because they are going to lose at least half a condition score while they're suckling. Right, housing. There's lots of different types of housing, and I'm sure all the people that are watching this will have their own types of housing, and probably have variation within that housing of what they've got. But essentially what you're trying to do is create the right environment that optimizes piglet survival and sow health. You know, dry, warm, draft free, they're the key things. So whatever you've got, whether it's indoors, outdoors, they're the key factors. So indoors, I'll cover different types of indoor systems. We're all crated at Harper Adams, and the crate is there to design to protect piglets. Yeah, it confines the sow, but it is proven time and time again to minimize crushing of piglets. And even in our system, crushing is still 60% of that pre-weaning mortality. The photo on the right is one of our floating crates, and this is sort of a crate plus, as it were. So this is a crate that when she sits up or stands up, it raises her out of the ground. It's on pneumatic system, and it sort of raises her up, so the piglets are out of the danger area. The design of any crate is to make the sow go down in 2 movements. So she can't just flop over and crush piglets. So in an open pen where she can just lay down, potentially crush a lot of piglets, that won't happen in a standard crate because she has to go down in at least 2 movements. It does give a chance for piglets to get out of the way. The floating crate obviously adds another dimension that they're not there when she does lie down. So again, from our experience, it drops layover mortality by half. Doesn't stop it, because you're still ending up some piglets lay on that area when it's raised and don't fall off, but it certainly improves survivability for the piglet. So some people would say a non-welfare friendly system because the sow's enclosed, but very much a welfare system for the piglets. Then you can have indoors free farrowing. I've got sort of two extremes here. The one on the left, very modern indoor farrowing systems in controlled environments. These are all the craze across Europe at the moment because they're being pushed in that direction. You've still got a heated creep area for the piglets to escape from the sow and get warm. You've still got slatted floors in it, parts of it, so the dung falls through. You've still got rails to protect the piglets, but the sow isn't confined. And then you've got the opposite end of the scale, and I'm sure people listening will have lots of other systems between these two, where it's just a big open yard and the sow is farrowing on lovely deep straw, but very little control perhaps of the surrounding environment, and also big high risk if she decides to flop over when they're very small and crush them. So again, it's probably breeds for systems a little bit. If you've got a very maternal, very protective breed, the one on the right would work well, but even on the left, you'd still need a pretty maternal sow to make that system operate well. About 50% of the herd in the UK at the moment farrow outdoors, and the bulk of those, I would imagine, will be in systems similar to what is on the left, which is an ark, can be insulated, uninsulated, but essentially no floor in it, on grass with straw in, with a little fender on the front to stop the piglets escaping in the first few days. And pretty basic stuff, but still creates a really good environment if managed correctly for farrowing in. The one on the right again is the extreme of probably what would happen on a day like today. 29 degrees in Shropshire, a sow would find a nice shaded area, come out of the wallow nice and cool, find a shaded area, make a bit of a nest out of some long grass, give birth, and it will be fine while the weather's good. But if we had a thunderstorm tonight, those piglets are going to be really at risk. So it's trying to get that environment and optimize it. So preparation of an indoor system, this is what I would say is the ideal. You want to remove all the muck from the previous sow that was in that pen, that building, and you ideally want to soak it, use a detergent, pressure wash, disinfect, dry again before you put the next sow in there. You don't want to have bacteria from a previous incumbent in that system being spread to the next sow going in there, and it's just breaking that cycle by doing that washing and disinfecting. Obvious things: check for damage, repair. You don't want any sharp edges, you don't want broken rails that will protect the piglets and things like this. In an indoor system, if you can heat the room, that's great, because that will dry it up as well. It'll get it a better environment for the piglets when they're born, and obviously add bedding, whatever that may be. Like I've said before, bring the sows in at least 3 to 5 days before the due date. 7 days if you can would be ideal, so that she can acclimatise to that system. Preparation outdoors: move your ark to a fresh piece of ground, ideally that hasn't had a sow farrow on it previously, so lots of grass on it. Free draining is great, because if it rains, you want that water to go into the soil, not into the ark. The great thing outdoors is if you turn your ark upside down, if you've cleaned out all the muck out of it, the sunshine or the UV rays in particular do a fantastic job of disinfecting. If you're able to wash and disinfect, fantastic, but actually the UV rays will do the job for you to a good degree. Again, repair damage, and this is mainly things like sharp edges, but also if you've got tin on the outside that's just pulling up a bit, it might let drafts in. And again, put an ark on as flat a piece of ground as you can, but in reality you may not sit perfectly flat, so try and dig that base in a little bit to prevent drafts coming in, because the drafts will cause chilling and problems with your piglets. Position close to a water source. Again, it sounds quite obvious, doesn't it? But if you've got one trough at the end of the field and you've got your ark at the other end of the field, when this sow is producing lots of milk after she's given birth, she's going to want a lot of water. So she doesn't want to be trekking too far to get that water. Ensure all the vents and flaps are working. In the winter, you'll probably want that ark pretty well closed up with vents, and you'll want those flaps on the front stopping the wind blowing in, so you do get a really nice cozy environment in that ark. And then obviously add bedding in there as well to create that optimal environment. So we've got our system. We put the sow in. We're now looking for the signs of farrowing. The sow on the right is showing the classic making the bed. So she's nest building with the straw. She'll put that straw to make the bed exactly how she wants. And in an outdoor system, they'll gather grass and they'll put all sorts in it. So obvious signs that she's preparing for farrowing. They become far more restless than they have been for that previous few days that they've been in that farrowing accommodation. The udder, whilst it's very swollen anyway, becomes more firm. And if you can squeeze milk out of the teats within 8 hours, she'll be giving birth. They sometimes show a twitching of a tail, and a lot of sows will expel blood fluids from the back end before they give birth. So it's nothing too much to worry about. When they actually start farrowing, the stats say it lasts 1.5 to 4.5 hours. Can be very, very variable. We've all seen sows that pop them all out in no time at all, and some that it does seem to take a lot longer, but still no issues. They still get them out and still have a healthy litter. According to the stats, again, 16 minutes between piglets. So don't worry too much if she hasn't popped a pig out too quickly, particularly between the first and second pig. It seems to be that's the period where there's a longer gap quite often. So if she's had one pig and half an hour later she hasn't had another one, don't necessarily worry. If it gets to 45 minutes, it might be worth just checking she's not blocked. Piglets come head or hind leg first. It doesn't really matter. It's not like with sheep and cattle where it's a bit more important in that respect. So don't worry, they're quite small in comparison to the sow. They're probably only average 1.5 kilos, but you'll have a massive a range in that. And we get anything from 0.5 kilo up to 2.5 kilos because we're weighing everything at birth. If the umbilical cord is still attached, don't just go and pull it and snap it. You can get a lot of bleeding from the piglet if you do that. Let it snap it off on its own accord after a couple of minutes. And then the placenta should be past, after an hour or so after the last piglet's been born. And again, ideally, it's great to be able to see that placenta. You can't always in every system. Outdoors, it's difficult quite often to see it in the straw because the sow might be protective and you can't get too close. Slatted systems, it might go straight down the slat, but you don't want retained placenta because you will get infection. So when to assist, and this is the difficult one. When do you actually decide you're going to help? When you've got piglets that have been born, but perhaps she's only had 1 or 2, but labour appears to have stopped, then there's something amiss, and it might be worth then going with some oxytocin and getting that contractions, getting the labour going again. But don't do that without checking, because at the end of the day, if she's blocked and you give her oxytocin and get those contractions pushing, you're going to have a log jam inside her and you're going to kill a lot of piglets trying to push through that blocked piglet. So if that's happened, check. If she's not blocked, you can give her oxytocin. Again, if she's still in labour after 45 minutes after the last piglet being born and the other piglets are all dry, again, she might have finished and the placenta hasn't come out, but also there might be a blockage, especially if there's a low number. Get a glove on, get some lube on and just check. If the gestation length is very long, there might be issues. If the sow's in distress, at the end of the day, sows at farrowing don't tend to be in distress. If she's in distress, there's something wrong. Off feed's a bit more of a difficult one because on the day of giving birth, quite often they won't feed. But if they've been off feed for a day or two, there might be something going wrong inside. There might be pigs dying inside her, and there might be then this foul smell coming from her, and you do need to get in there to try and pull those piglets out and still get oxytocin to push those piglets out. Otherwise, you are going to end up with infection in that sow and probably inability to breed again. So they farrowed, those piglets are born. Piglets sadly aren't really very well equipped to cope or to stay warm without some help, and they can easily become chilled. They're very small, they've got a high surface area to volume ratio. They haven't got a lot of fat inside or outside, or sort of subcutaneous, sorry. They haven't got much in the way of hair. and they're born wet. So you know what it's like. Today it's great to get wet and have a breeze blow over you to chill you off. But when it's cold and it's wet, in the depths of winter, you really don't want that cold, wet piglet getting any colder. It will chill, it will get a hypothermia very, very quickly, and it will never get round and suckle, and it will die. So how do you ensure that good start? In an indoor system, it's great. You can put supplementary heat. So you could put like the photo at the bottom there, you can put a lamp behind the sow. So when she gives birth, those piglets are instantly warmed up and dried off. And that gives them that sort of boost to get round to the udder and start suckling. You can use bedding in an outdoor system. The bedding's a great insulator. It also wicks away the moisture off the piglets. Ideally, you want a temperature of 22 to 24. You know, daylight today, I think our farrowing rooms are about 30 degrees, so they're very hot, too hot really. But it's just having that micro environment, not necessarily the whole room environment, but where the piglets are being born needs to be reasonably warm to get them dry. The really critical thing is getting colostrum into those piglets. At the end of the day, it's a source of energy, nutrients, and it's a massive source of immunity for those piglets. There's a huge amount of immunoglobulin-rich colostrum that's produced in that sow, but those immunoglobulins decrease very, very quickly post-farrowing. So once she starts farrowing, within 5 hours, the quality of that milk in terms of helping the immunity of those piglets has gone. So if a piglet ends up coming out of a sow, sits in a corner, chilled for 5 hours, and then you get it suckling, it won't stand as good a chance of surviving as those piglets that got round to the udder and got that colostrum straight away. So what can you do to help colostrum intake? So these are some strategies: split suckling, assisted suckling, and hand feeding. We do a huge amount of split suckling on our unit because we get such big numbers born. Our average born alive is about 16 and a half at the moment, yet a sow probably on average has got 14 to 15 teats. So what we will do, as soon as the sow has finished giving birth, we will take the biggest pigs off her because they've already got round to the udder. They've probably had a little bit of colostrum anyway. We'll then put the smaller pigs, put those in a box, keep them in a warm environment, put the smaller pigs on the udder and let them suckle for an hour and a half, and then swap them over. And we'll do this several times in that first day to make sure that they get not only the colostrum, but keep getting the milk. Assisted suckling, again, it takes a bit of time and effort, but it's getting those smaller pigs round to the udder and get them latched onto a teat and get some colostrum into them. It can be time consuming, but it can be well worth it because you could easily save a small piglet that you would consider low viability, but if it's got a belly full of high energy colostrum, it can soon boost it and get it going. And then you can hand feed colostrum. And again, we do quite a bit of this as well. If we have a sow that's had a small number of piglets, but is very, very milky, we'll milk that sow off and we'll freeze that colostrum if needs be to use when we need it. And we'll syringe feed those piglets and get them going. So it's 3 really good strategies there. Once those piglets are up and going, 24, 48 hours, they're firing away on their own. What else can we do to help survivability of those piglets? Well, we do a lot of cross fostering, and if you've got more than one sow giving birth at any one time, it's a great strategy. It's matching the feed stations to the number of piglets essentially. We'll have sows have 2 piglets and we'll have sows have 22 piglets. So evening those numbers up to match the teat number is a really good strategy. We've also got supplementary milk systems in our farrowing crates because even after we've done cross fostering, quite often we'll end up with more piglets than the number of teats that we've got. So we'll offer milk 24/7 ad lib to those piglets. Even though some of the bigger piglets that don't really need it will take that, it's still helping those ones that are in need. And then another strategy that's very common on the continent is shunt fostering. This is where you wean a sow early, a very good mother that's very milky. You wean her piglets off, not out of the same batch, probably 3, 4 week, 5 week piglets off that sow, and you then offer her another litter of piglets essentially at a day old, 48 hours old, and she then rears those. You need a good sow. You need a sow that will take to those piglets readily. but it does allow you to rear more piglets. Outdoor piglet management, you've just got a little bit less control in an outdoor situation. Ideally use wheat straw for nest building. Barley straw, oat straw, it's just a bit too long and stalky and can easily wrap around piglets and impede them moving. It can also be very fluffy and they can be buried very easily underneath that straw. Wheat straw tends to break up a lot more. The real mantra I think that most outdoor producers use is little and often with the straw. You want a dry bed, but you put too much straw in, it's as bad as not putting enough straw in, because you can easily bury piglets underneath it. If it means you have to rake straw out because she's made such a big nest and gathered straw from other arks or grass, you need to do that at farrowing, because the risk of those piglets by having too much bedding in there is real. Keep the fender on the front, I would say, for at least a week. You want those piglets to be contained in that safe area. You don't want them wandering about and losing their way. After a week, they'll be fit and strong, and they'll know how to get back to that ark. Again, in the outdoor situation, important to control predators. I used to keep outdoor pigs many years ago, and initially I didn't have a fox fence around the paddocks, and I started losing a lot of piglets. I thought they were essentially getting lost in the straw and lost. And it was only when it snowed you realise, when the footprints are all over the snow, that foxes, badgers come in and will take those piglets. So those mystery piglets were stolen. And again, check for drafts. A draft is a pig's worst enemy, or piglet's worst enemy, in those first few days in particular, when they're very vulnerable to be chilled. Some other general pig management. Pigs are born very low in iron, and they do need supplementary iron, and what source you give to them is entirely up to you. If you're in an outdoor situation, access to soil, they will get iron from the soil. They might still not get enough iron from the soil, and again, when I kept outdoor pigs, I still gave a supplementary iron to those boosts to those piglets, and that can be an injection. It can be like the picture on the right, a powder that you put in a little bowl and they root through it, and they don't have to take a lot of it in to get enough iron to protect them. If you don't give them that supplementary iron, 2 to 3 weeks in, those piglets will show signs of anemia. They'll be starting to look pale. They'll start to have a sort of paler, scarier type defecation, and you can turn it round by giving them iron, but you're going to impede their growth, and they will have ill thrift, and they'll potentially leave them open to other diseases. So definitely supplement iron. I've said already about supplementary milk. You don't want piglets starving. There are strategies of, even if you take the piglet off and hand rear them, to rear those pigs. I put teeth grind or clip in with a question mark after it. It really does depend on your situation and the number of piglets you're trying to rear. It tends to be more of a problem with big litters and not enough feed stations on the sow for those litters, because they're going to compete for those teats. And if they've still got their needle teeth, this is the needle teeth we're talking about grinding off. We grind them off at Harper, just blunt them off a little bit. We're not getting into the cavity. We're just blunting them to protect the sow's udder. We don't want them nicking the sow's udder, because if they do, there's potential for bacteria to go in and cause mastitis. But also, while they're competing with each other, they're the needle teeth of what become the tusks, and they will shred each other's faces. So we do it to prevent that. Again, tail docking with a question mark. We don't tail dock anymore, but some people do, to protect the pigs when they get a bit older, if the tail biting becomes an issue. A pig's tail's got blood to the tip of it, obviously, but it doesn't actually have nerve endings right to the tip. So if another pig starts biting the tail, at first they don't notice it. So that's why people will tail dock, not to protect them as a piglet, but to protect them later on in life. Castrate, again, question mark. 92% of pigs are sold farm assured, I believe, and farm assurance doesn't allow castration in pigs. So if you want to sell farm assured pigs, you can't castrate. However, if you've got a market selling direct to butchers, butchers don't like boars. They're worried about boar tainting the meat if those boars have got a bit too mature, so they prefer to buy a castrate or a gilt. So it's horses for courses a little bit on the castration. Creep feed, again, it's one of those, if you can, in a situation, it is definitely worthwhile. and the next graph will show that for some work we did. Don't worry too much about the graph. I've just pulled it from a trial that we did a while ago, but it's just essentially saying that those piglets that had access to the creep feed got to slaughter 5 days sooner, or if you look at it another way, had 5 days more growth potentially if you've got limited accommodation, and that's worth money. So giving them a tiny little bit of creep feed, it not only takes pressure off the sow, you know, they're not so reliant on the sow's milk, it also prepares their gut to be mature enough to take dry food when you wean them. You know, it's a big change for a piglet at weaning. They're losing their mum, they're changing the environment, they're changing their type of food. So creep feeding can help with that. You need to manage the environment in the farrowing accommodation. You don't want illness or disease to spread. So all in, all out production is fantastic, where if you've got 2 or 3 sows, 23 sows, 100 sows farrowing together, try and do all in, all out. Try and put them in the accommodation together, let them farrow, let them suckle, and then let them move out together, and then clean and disinfect, ready for the next batch to go in. Separate equipment's good. You know, try and use brushes and shovels that are specific for the maternity area. Foot dips again are really good in the maternity area, because those piglets are really susceptible. You know, they're really vulnerable to picking up any bacteria. So just dip your feet. Even if you're going with your wellies around the unit or between different species of animals, make sure they're clean when you go anywhere near the piglets. You know, obvious things like flooring being nice and smooth, so you're just not getting bacteria and cracks, and you're not getting pools of liquid, which are basically just pools of bacterial soup. And try, where possible, to not use porous divisions. If you've got them, try and get rid of them. Wood is just a classic place for bacteria to hide. Plastic, you can wash it, you can clean it, bacteria can't get into it. So think about that. So we've got this temperature and ventilation. With temperature, we've got a bit of a sort of not ideal situation for either the piglet or the sow if the temperature's too high or too low. The sow at farrowing would probably prefer it to be 16 degrees, whereas the piglet at 16 degrees has a potential to chill. So you can change this by managing the environment for the piglet, so a little sub-environment, so a creep area, or a box with a heat lamp, or a pad or something like that, where the piglets can get, where they can be 30 degrees, which would be lovely for them, but the sow in the bigger environment is still quite cool. Other ways with outdoors, obviously wallows, shades are fantastic. The sow can go and wallow and cool down. She can lie in the shade and be a lot cooler, whereas the piglets can stay in the ark with the nicely insulating straw, and again the ark heating up a little bit from the sun on it as well. So it's just trying to manage those environments, and there's real good reasons for this, which we'll get on to in terms of feeding the sow in a minute. So managing the sow at farrowing, you don't want a sow to be constipated at farrowing. You need to feed high fibre diet prior to farrowing. Ideally, some bran or some fruit or veg prior to farrowing is great. It works in exactly. Pigs are very similar to humans. It works in exactly the same way. It gets them moving quite quickly. Because the problem is, if you've got too much feces in the sow when she's trying to give birth, there can be competition for space. You want it to be as relatively empty so those piglets can pop out nice and easily. Again, the lady on the right is checking for mastitis in the sow. Check that udder when she's about to give birth, when she's given birth. Check it isn't too hard, it isn't hot, it isn't going purple. At the end of the day, if she's getting mastitis, those piglets aren't going to get any milk. So if she's getting mastitis, get some antibiotic in and get something like Metacam into that sow as quickly as you possibly can to prevent that getting any worse. Again, any fever, any infection, any high temperatures, get it treated with antibiotics straight away, so that you're not going to impede the milk flow to those piglets, or the quality of the milk to those piglets. Eating at farrowing, has she ate? Ideally, you want the sow to have ate prior to farrowing. Some sows don't, they choose not to eat within sort of, I don't know, half a day before they give birth. But again, there's loads of evidence to show they'll have a faster farrowing, and the piglets have more vitality in them if she's ate 3 or 4 hours prior to giving birth. So again, it's worth making sure she does try and get something to eat. You know, we feed once a day in gestation. We start feeding twice a day when they get in the farrowing room even before they've given birth, to give them that energy boost and give those piglets that vitality. Is she drinking? If a sow's not drinking, there's something seriously wrong. So, make sure that she is. Feeding the sow. Now, this is really, really important, because during lactation, they need a high voluntary feed intake, because the demand for nutrients from those piglets will go up and up and up every day. And if she doesn't match that demand by producing lots more milk, she's going to lose condition. She's going to mobilize her body reserves. It might be back fat, it might be protein in a really difficult situation. And we don't want that. So VFI must increase. High temperature, exactly the same with us. If we get hot, we don't want to eat so much. The sow's the same. So we want to keep that temperature level, ideally below 20 degrees, ideally probably 18 degrees, but you've got to manage the environment for the piglets as well. We don't want them getting cold. Illness again, any fever, any problems, she won't want to eat. Again, with voluntary feed intake, water is really, really important. Whatever pig, whatever age, if they eat a kilo of food at sort of 80, 90% dry matter, they will need 2 to 2.5 kilos of water to go with it. We're going to ask these sows to eat a lot of food during lactation and up their appetite quite significantly. They need a lot of good, clean water and easy access to that water. If it's a trough, it needs to be nice, clean water. It doesn't need to be mucky water in that trough, otherwise she's just having a bacterial soup, which is not going to help her at all. And if it's a nipple drinker, it really does need to have a fast flow rate, because she's not going to stand for hours a day just trying to get water out of it. What we're aiming for is no more than half a body condition score lost during lactation. The card on the right is our feed card for our sows. We start them off in 2.5 kilos on day 1, and we build that up to day 14 when they're on ad lib. That's quite demanding what we're asking them to eat, increasing. We've got a sow with a really good appetite. We've got a sow that produces a lot of milk. We've got a sow with a lot of piglets on. I wouldn't recommend that for a sow that's rearing 10 piglets, because you'd probably produce way too much milk in the first instance for those 10 piglets. And it's quite a big ask to get up to 14 kilos. We've got certain sows that will eat 16 kilos a day, which is massive, massive increase compared with them only being eating 2.5 during most of gestation. So I think I've probably rattled on long enough for everybody. I will read the conclusion out. Both sows and piglets are involved in farrowing management. The sow must be managed so that she provides nutrition to a litter while maintaining her health status, and that allows future productivity. It is important to consider the environmental control that keeps both sow and litter comfortable, but do remember that farrowing and nursing are instinctive activities for both the sow and the piglet. So you only need to assist when complications are evident. So I was going to get tongue-tied there. So thank you very much for listening. That's all, folks, and I think we now move on to questions and answers. Is that right?
Yes, correct, Richard. Thank you very much for that very informative webinar. Diolch yn fawr iawn am yr webinar wych yna. Hoffwn symud ymlaen nawr i'r sesiwn cwestiwn and ateb, the question and answer session. There's some few questions come in from the attendees. But briefly, before moving on to, I'd like just to go through what Menter Moch has available for your businesses that relates to this topic at the moment. We've just published the new farrowing fact sheets, and this is available on the resource hub for you to have a look and to have a read on. Also, we have a new webinar coming on the 29th of July with Alan Stewart from Harper on weaning management. Therefore, looking forward to that one too. And we have a webinar on the 16th of July too with Dr. Alex Tomset from the George Vet on managing pigs in hot weather. Therefore, yeah, very useful in this weather this week.
Quite apt, yeah.
Therefore, if you'd like any more information, don't hesitate to contact us. Am fwy o wybodaeth, peidiwch â oedi i gysylltu â ni am unrhyw wybodaeth pellach. Therefore,